Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Agent Advantage podcast, where we strive to help agents embrace success and drive change one episode at a time. We're finally back together for an episode. I was gone, Em was gone. We both came down with a sickness, and now we're back. So just want to quickly shout out all of our new followers, all of our new subscribers. Please, if you're listening to this podcast, share us with other agent friends who might need this information. We're looking to grow and help more people with every episode. Today's episode is going to be full of a lot of good information. We're really going to touch on the basics, but it's going to be all about buyer consultations and why they're so important. Emily and I both have a great emphasis on buyer consultations, but we do things a little bit differently too. So we'll talk about how we both do things, what the key takeaways will be, and then go from there. Okay.
Yeah, I'm super excited about this episode.
I think this is going to be a good one. This is something that I really struggled with when I first started in the industry, just how to find buyers for one, but also how to capture them, how to set those initial appointments, and then figuring out what the heck do you talk about to these people during this consultation. It can be really nerve-wracking when you're first getting started. I know. Go ahead.
Ask you, have you always done buyer consultations? Is that something that you started day one with, or like?
Yeah, I think they've developed over time because I've gotten better. I've learned what works, what doesn't work for me and my personality with my business. But I think you kind of have to have a buyer consultation, at least some form of it. So even if you're just meeting somebody at a house before showings and going briefly over the process, you're going to be so much more successful. But I do know some agents don't, or they forget that part, or they feel like they have to do showings automatically so that they can get these people. But we'll talk about that a little bit more because I know you've had experience with that. I know agents on your team have had experience with that. What about you? Have you always done buyer consults? Have you struggled with them?
No, I haven't always done them. I actually failed forward. Whenever I was a brand new agent, everyone was like, "Okay, yeah, I want to go see a house." And what do? You go show them a house, I didn't really even understand the process much whenever I was a new agent. I had never bought a house. I was 23 years old, and quite honestly, I had no business with their trust. However, I did it. I made it work. It was nerve-wracking. Now, and like having bought a few houses or several houses, I guess, and looking back, I'm like, what the heck was I doing? And um, I just kind of fumbled my way through it. And sometimes you have to, but also I failed my way forward because I learned whenever we were five houses in, or even writing an offer, they didn't know what earnest money was, and they didn't know what it was, like the purpose of it. They didn't understand about the home inspection. And I was explaining myself, I was literally explaining the whole process every time I ran into an issue. Mine have developed over time.
Yeah, and I think that's really important too because a lot of agents might be listening and say, "Well, I haven't done them, but I've been successful. I've been okay." And even in the beginning, I think I had a lot of people. I had you. I had a lot of good mentors to kind of help instill these different things in me. But we talk about a lot on this podcast specifically just about managing expectations. And buyer consults are kind of where you start that foundation for expectations.
Hmm.
And they can look a little bit different, right? I mean, you could meet someone at their house, you could meet someone at the office, at the coffee shop, it could be over Zoom. It can be different given the person, given the situation, given your business and how you run things. But I think having some sort of buyer consultation in some form is very important, don't you think?
No, I 100% agree because, and I know we say this all the time on this podcast, but just to hit on what Michaela said again, it just manages the expectations because we
Mhm.
know that relationships fail because of unmet expectations. And we can go even further and say they're unmet because they are unset.
I think that should just be one of our taglines because I think we say that every episode because it's so
Yeah, we
important.
do. Sorry,
But
I'm
no,
really just
no, I
trying to
love
drive it
it.
home.
We're really driving the point home with that. So yeah, like you said, having those unset expectations, have you had instances where, I mean, you just said like you have people who have no idea what the steps are. I can relate to that too.
Oh,
Do you have anything like a specific instance where that has come back to bite you?
oh yeah, yeah. Well, one time because I told
Not
you
to
I have
call
an
you
illustration.
out.
No, this is a transparent podcast. We're here
Mhm.
to share our wins and sometimes when we learn. And it was, I still remember the buyer and everything. I did not do a consultation. I believe I had just started implementing consultations, but this buyer seemed very adamant on what they knew what they wanted. They're like, "Hey, we want to see this house." And sometimes we're afraid or we don't know how to approach, like, "Hey, let's set up a consultation, go over your needs and wants analysis." And they're like, well, I know what I want. Okay, that's great. So that's kind of like awkward because you're like, I don't want to, like, they have a strong personality, I would say.
Mhm.
Well, we didn't know the age of the roof. The seller didn't know the age of the roof. In the state of Alabama, you don't always have people who pull permits. It's completely okay. Like, they're not going to come rip your roof off if you don't pull a permit. So there was no permit pulled. There was no history of the roof. The sellers weren't sure. This guy told me there's no way that they don't know, and you can find out. I said, yes, sir. I really like. There's really no way, but we can have a home inspection done, and it can estimate the life of it. And he was so pissed at me. He was like, "This is absurd. And he kept saying, like, this is how they do it in Florida. And whenever I lived in Florida, I would never sell a house. And you always know the age of the roof and the HVAC. Like, you have to pull permits and all that." I said, "Yes, sir, we don't hear." He wasn't hearing that. He was already pissed because he didn't know the age of the roof and I couldn't find out the age of the roof. So he actually fired me.
Mhm. And and again, that's one of those situations where you really couldn't do anything, but maybe having a consultation. And certain people, you live and you learn. Some people aren't going to be happy, and who's meant to work for you will come and it'll work out. But, and I really strongly believe that. But had you
Oh,
had,
I was so happy he fired me. You have no
yeah,
idea.
and so
Yes,
it kind
sir.
of works out. But in that instance, if you were able to go over, and that's a very niche thing. It's a very like nuanced, specific thing. But maybe it would have helped set those expectations, just saying Alabama operates a little bit differently than Florida or any other state, and this is how we do things, and
Well,
this is.
also asking the question, have you ever bought a home before?
And that's kind of what I was going to say, maybe gauging that, because if they've bought in Alabama, they might know that. Had they bought somewhere else, then you could have gauged, okay, let me inform you of X, Y, and Z. It could have helped, but yeah, I appreciate you being so honest about that one. It's always a
Yeah.
tough pill to swallow.
Yeah. I remember crying. I definitely shed tears over that one just because of the way
Yeah,
he talked to me. And then I was like, you know what? I'm just grateful to not have to deal with that anymore.
you live and you learn. But I
Yep.
do think that they're important, and kind of going off of that too, you saying like it can get awkward to ask people like, hey, we need to have a consultation beforehand. And we'll talk about ways to implement and do different things. And I think we should have an objection handling or how to work through awkward scenarios at a later date, because we're just going to go over the basics today. For today, we're going to talk about briefly where we find our leads to find these buyers to actually have the consultations. Then we'll move into what we actually talk about during the consultation, and how to set those expectations that we're talking about. Go back to episode 2 if you haven't already, how to find your first 10 clients. We go over a lot of lead generation tactics and how to find your first clients if you're struggling with that, or if you're looking for more inspiration on how to find clients, go refer back to that episode. How do you find leads and where are you finding these buyers? This can be open houses, social media, referrals, online inquiries if you're doing anything like Zillow or realtor.com. The importance of a quick response time is what we always, the follow up. The fortune is in the follow up. We've said that many times, but strike while the iron is hot. That's how you're going to get these people in and get them where they want to go, but also be able to kind of not control, but have that, I guess, yeah, control of where the direction that you're going. Would you agree?
Yeah. Their excitement, I've always heard it this way too. Their excitement is at the height whenever they put in their information. Speed to lead, strike while the iron's hot. Those are great analogies that all emphasizes the importance of contacting them as soon as you get the lead. Like within the hour, but like if you could do it in the first 30 minutes, you're going to capture their interest. And that's a big thing because what happens is whenever someone fills out a lead form, they super excited then, and then like tomorrow, let's just say, oh, I'm just going to call that lead tomorrow when it's convenient for me. They're at work, maybe their interest has died down a little bit.
Or they're
They
overthinking, or they might start thinking like maybe I'm not ready for this, or maybe,
Right, but they've never had that conversation with an
Mhm.
agent to kind of just get them like, I would say even like more excited and hold them to that goal. Then the next day should be a follow up. So when you're following up, it's a lot easier because you've already made that connection. The connection is the most important thing. Building rapport is the most important thing. So if you want to do the most important thing while ever they're the most interested,
Mhm.
that's the key.
And I think home buying, it's a very serious process, but it should feel fun too, right? Like when I contact somebody, I show that excitement for them. Like, I'm so excited. Is this your first house? Like, what are you looking for? Like, I really emphasize like how cool of an experience it is for them, how excited I am for
Hmm.
them, to help them, to be kind of their guide and their resource during this super fun and exciting time. So, and also recognize that people might be really nervous if this is their first home purchase. And so lead with that, and mirror, like we talk about. If it's an investment property and they're very financially driven, then you can match that. If they're first time home buyers and they're really excited and all of these things. So that's kind of a tangent. um
I think necessary
but
though.
necessary, yeah. Learning how to match people's energy and kind of what seems most important to them. And that's going to lead us into actually moving from the first contact into finding and setting that appointment. I know you talk about this a lot too, and that's the art of asking the right questions. Not yes or no questions. They're kind of open-ended questions on figuring out what's most important to them. Some questions I have written down, and you can chime in on some things that you do. What has you thinking about buying a home right now? That's an open ended question, and that can really lead anywhere. And depending on that answer, you can ask more questions to get deeper in that. So, we need more space. Okay. Are you expanding your family? Do you have, different situation? Maybe a mother in law is moving in, maybe someone's sick and needs help, or there's just so many different life situations. And that's how you start to build that rapport. Hopefully that makes sense the way I'm
Yeah,
saying.
they say that the answer comes typically on the third question. Let's just do a little role play here really
Mhm.
quick for the sake of this. Michaela, you can answer however you want to. What makes you want to buy a home?
Well, my partner and I were looking to get more space and step into this next chapter. We have a home that we're currently renting, so we want to buy, moving into this next chapter in our life.
That's awesome. Super excited for you guys. So tell me more about this next chapter. Like, what does that entail?
Yeah, so actually, we got engaged recently, and I anticipate that we'll want to probably start a family in the next couple of years. And where we're at right now just isn't conducive for expanding our family in that way.
Okay, I didn't have to answer the third question or ask the third question because I found my answer on the second question, but I
Mhm.
did not find my answer on the first question.
Mhm.
And that question was, why do you want to buy a house? And you just said like that we're excited, we're going to our next chapter. And then when I asked another question, then it came out of like, oh yeah, we would, like to start a family. That
Mhm.
answer wasn't on the first one. So guys, y'all saw firsthand there how important it is to ask more questions in conversation. And remember, those that ask the questions control the conversation. Where do you want the conversation to go? You have full reins and full control of it. Sometimes it can get out of hand, especially if you have more of a domineering buyer that you're working with, which is
Mhm.
hard, but we can combat that with what? Another question.
Mhm. Yeah, questions. And the more people talk about themselves, naturally, the more they start to feel more comfortable. But it might
Hmm.
take 3 to 5 questions to start getting there. Me and Em have a great rapport, so it's kind of hard for me to be caged off with her. But yeah, I mean, you find out by asking the right questions. And so another question I have is, are you currently working with an agent? That's extremely important given the fairly new laws surrounding buyer brokerage agreements and all of that. Again, refer to your broker and your state laws and all of that regarding agency. But that's a great one to ask. That kind of covers your base at the forefront to make sure that they're not working with someone else. And then what's your ideal timeline? All of these questions kind of allow you to navigate their needs and what's most important. And there's plenty of questions If you have any, you can chime in too.
I say you need to create, like, you need to have systems in your business. If you don't have systems, I'm just going to be so honest. And if this steps on any toes, I'm not sorry. You need to have systems. If you don't have systems in your business, guys, you guys are running a hobby, operating a hobby. You're doing real estate as a hobby, not as a career and not as a business, because businesses have systems and models. Okay. We have a buyer intake sheet, and on that buyer intake sheet, it asks if they're currently in a lease or if they have a home to sell before they purchase. The reason we ask that question is because if they're in a lease and their lease ends, and we also have the, when does it end? That question. If their lease ends in, let's say April, and we're in March, whoa, like we do have a problem. Like, okay,
Mhm.
my next question, if when they answer that, is going to be, okay, can you do a month to month lease with your apartment complex? Because it's going to take X amount of days in order to close
Mhm.
a home. And typically it's going to take us maybe a week to 2 weeks to find a home once we
Yeah.
start our search. Setting those expectations up front is another reason why you need to have the buyer consult rather than going and looking at a house and someone's like, oh my gosh, I thought we can move in after like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Um, you'd be surprised. They don't
Yeah.
know. Like, stop
Yeah.
acting like everybody knows the real estate process. That's why you're a real estate agent. Your job is to educate. And if you are failing to educate, you're failing to do your job.
Well, and that kind of goes into my next point too. And all the things you just talked about allows you to lead them in a more authentic way and to ask questions in a more authentic way, get to build that rapport genuinely, educating them early, like you just said. Let them know up front, like, hey, there's a lot of information out there. This process can be really overwhelming, and that's not to discourage you, but that's just to let you know that I'm here, I'm on your side. I want to be an advocate and a resource for you. When can we set up a time to chat or to meet up? And that just helps you set the appointment, not asking them, can we? Like when? And I know you've talked about that, like being more direct, like setting that appointment while you're on the phone. And of course, gauge the people if they have things going on, try to work with them. Moving from that initial contact to the meeting, that's how you get it done, is setting that appointment while you have them on the phone. Do you agree?
I 100% agree. Sometimes people have to check in with their spouse and just
Mhm.
say, okay, let me get back to you. Well, it's our job to follow up. It is our job. It is not their job to get back to us. It's our job to follow up with them because they have jobs. That is our job.
Right?
Like,
That's a
can I
good
be
point.
honest? Like, they have a job. Our job
Yeah.
is to follow up with them.
Yeah.
And that's what we're hired and paid to do. That they
Mhm.
hire us because they need us to help hold them accountable, to hold their hand.
Mhm.
And when we don't follow up with them, we're not holding their hand. And I'm not saying that you have to hold their hand. What I mean by is in the highest representation. I don't mean it like that. I mean it as in they hire you to do a job. You see to it that the job is freaking done.
Mhm.
And all too often, and I've dropped the ball. Trust me, I have. I'm speaking from experience.
Mhm.
I have dropped the ball so many times whenever it comes to follow up because we're working. We're all guilty of it. We're working on what's in front of us, and then we forget to follow up, and then we've seen them close with another realtor on Facebook, and that is like a punch in the gut. But whose fault is it? It's our own, and we have to start taking extreme ownership.
Well, and that could be the difference between getting a check or losing $10,000 just because you didn't
Hmm.
follow up. I mean, it's really that
Hmm.
simple. That's really just breaking it down to like the most basic terms. But the biggest thing, too, I think, is emphasizing that this is a meeting to help them, to give them information, to guide them. One of the biggest things that I struggle with is I never want to sound salesy. I'm trying to find that balance between let's set up an appointment, I'm here to do X, Y, and Z without feeling like you're overpowering them or have that commission breath.
So I would ask them the question like, hey, would you be free sometime this week, maybe like Monday or Tuesday after you get off
Mhm.
work? I just want to sit down and go over the process with you and your husband and just kind of like walk you guys through what's going to happen, all the what
Mhm.
ifs. Listen, it's completely free. It's only going to take about 45 minutes and we'll meet at my office. So I'm telling you all these things before you say yes because now you have, it's almost like asking whenever you go somewhere to someone's house, like a friend's house, like, okay, who's all over there?
Yeah.
You want to know all that before you even say
Before you
yes. So
commit to
I
it, right?
right. So I'm setting you up to say yes already by telling you all the things that you're going
Mhm.
to give hesitancy on or have
Mhm.
a reason to push back on. The more that I say about it, the less and less you're going to push back.
Do you ever do virtual appointments for people?
Yes,
Okay.
I'll
Do you want to
definitely
talk
do
about
mhm.
kind of how you structure that on your end?
I'll do it via Zoom. I will ask them ahead of time if they have 40 minutes of uninterrupted time, and I can do a Zoom if you guys can't meet in person. So I'll offer that in person, and then like if they kind of give pushback or anything, say, hey, yeah, I also can do it Zoom if that works better for y'all.
Mhm.
Or if they're just out of state, I tell them Zoom, right? And then I will share my screen and I will share the buyer checklist
Oh, I
with
love
them,
that.
and that way, if they have any questions, like I share my checklist of like all the stuff that I do too, so they can see that.
Mhm.
And then that way, like they've been walked through like on paper and they can follow along with the entire process. And then after that, I just ask them, do they have any questions? Or like, I'll stop. Do you have any questions? And then at the end, I recap the whole thing. So I say, okay, let's just recap everything. The first thing is pre-approval, and then we have our home search, and I'm going to set you up on an automated email, and then we're going to look at properties, and we're going to find one, we're going to make an offer. We negotiate the offer, we go under contract, and then I'm like, okay, earnest money, home inspection, appraisal, final walkthrough, closing. And like I recap it, and they're like, feel great. And so many people have thanked me for doing this. Like, that was so helpful. Like, that
Yeah.
was so informative. Like, I didn't realize everything was actually just so simple. No one has ever, I will tell you this, no one has ever left a buyer consult with me and be like, I'm a little nervous. That's a lot. They're like, wow, that
Yeah.
was easier than I thought because I made it easier because
Simplified it.
45 minutes of going over a checklist is freaking intimidating. So at the
Mhm.
end, I'm like, okay, let's recap it, y'all. It's only this, and this. And it's like 10 steps. And then like, okay, great. That's easy.
I like that recap. I don't know if I do that as much as I should. So I'm gonna take that into my business now too because it is a lot. And I oftentimes people are like, okay. It's like, do you have any questions? It's like, I can't even process what you just said. So
So
I like that a
I
lot.
I saw one team, I learned this at Family Reunion several years ago, that they were actually doing a PowerPoint and they just walked them through the PowerPoint. That way they could see pictures and everything. It was a cute little animated
Yeah.
PowerPoint. I thought about making a PowerPoint, just never got around to it.
Mhm.
And everything is just super simple with my
Mhm.
sheets. Um,
No, I like that. I think that's
and then at
great.
the end, we go through the process, and then at the end of the process, then I talk about their wants and needs. And if we
Mhm.
have time, I'll pull up listings on the MLS and just kind of look through some with them. But I do
I
do a
love that.
wants and needs analysis at my buyer consultation.
Okay, I like that. Maybe we could put something together for listeners too, like a downloadable sheet that could be very simple of all the things that we're talking about. Because just me thinking, I'm like, man, there's things I could do that you're doing in my business to help make that better. So maybe we could do that and either link it in the show notes or have it on our social media or something, because I think that would be helpful. You're so good at this kind of stuff. I love it.
It's it's not perfect, I'll tell you that.
Yeah. It's all trial and error too and figuring out what works best. For me, when I do virtual consultations, if I have a few days of lag time, what I'll do, I don't even know if I have it. I'll grab it really quick. And I've showed these before, but what I'll do is I'll send my home buyer packet. It's kind of the same of what you were talking about. It kind of just goes through the steps. That way they have it in person and we can go through it together. And then I stick like a Starbucks gift card or like a coffee gift card in there and I next day ship it. It's super inexpensive to do that. It gets to them, they can go get a coffee and they can hang out and have a coffee while we meet. It's just like a little personal touch. It's
I
not
love that.
always the most convenient if it's, you guys are meeting that night or something, but it is something you could do if you have some time.
Do
Or
you
even
give that to, like, do you put it in the mail for your local people also?
I do. Yeah, or I if I um, the town that I live in, it's very tight knit, it's very small. I've had times where, for example, I had a seller consultation last summer right before the 4th of July. I went and took a little bag with s'mores making kit, and then I just put this in there. And then that way they could have s'mores, enjoy their holiday, read over it. And then when I came to meet
That's
with
cute.
them, it was just like a fun little personal touch. So you can always do that if there's a holiday or something. It just gives you an excuse to go pop by their place. Don't touch people's mailboxes, obviously.
Yes.
And that's like a case by case thing, but usually just popping it in the mail, spend $5
I feel like
on shipping.
I could get a lot better at like personalizing things. I'm not a gift giver. Like gifts are like last on my love language. So I mean, I don't think like that. It takes a lot of work to think like that. Um,
See, that's like the easy thing for me. So it's funny how everyone's a little bit different. But you could do it too. You could send them like a digital gift card and they could
mhm.
go to Starbucks and you could send it through the app. There's so many different things. And that's what I do because that's how I show love, I think. It's just
I think so too.
little touches, but I like what you do. So I'm going to start incorporating that into my business as well. Let's talk about the actual consultation. We're going to get into the meat and potatoes of this now. What you've been waiting for, I think. And this is Emily, chime in where you want. If there's something that I say that you want to jump off of, let me know. The first thing is going to be setting the tone and managing expectations during this actual consultation. It's really important to emphasize to them and explain your role as their agent and as their guide, not just as someone who shows houses and does the bare minimum, because I think there's a big misconception about what real estate agents actually do if you haven't bought a house before. And walk them through the home buying timeline step by step, like we talked about. So if you're doing it virtually or if you're doing it in person, it's nice to have something for them to refer to. This shows like step by step
Yep.
all the way through closing, and people love visuals, being able to see, okay, we start here, we're looking at houses, and now we're negotiating and making an offer, and now we're looking at inspection and appraisal and all these different things. So look at the timeline step by step. Make sure you recap it like Em said at the end, just to kind of encapsulate the whole process. And then discuss current market conditions. Discuss what the nuances might be if you're buying a home in Alabama versus buying in Washington. You're going to talk about termites. You're going to talk about flood. Up here we have fire insurance, flood insurance, all of those different things that they might not be familiar with, especially when regarding insurance or termites, because that can be an additional cost that they might not be expecting if they're not familiar with the area. And then set realistic expectations around pricing, around competition, and around inventory. Is there a lot of inventory for the price range that they're looking at? Like you said, maybe you pull up some MLS listings and show them. A lot of times, like for example, right now, I have someone who wants a lot of different things in King County, Washington, which carries a very high price point compared to the rest of the state. And they want it for $350,000. And so there's things that your people might want, but they might not be able to afford it in the area that they want or in the way that they want. So setting those expectations and maybe even showing them what's on the market. Here's what we can find that fits some of your criteria in your price range. And then you go from there. And I know, Emily, that you've had some experience with that too, with just managing expectations and kind of figuring out what makes the most sense. Because if you don't manage those expectations up front, they're going to say, well, you can't find me anything. Like maybe I should find an agent who can find me something that I'm looking for. So is that making sense?
I've had that happen to me before too.
Yeah. Yeah. And it does get frustrating if they don't know. The first person they're going to blame is you, right? I mean, you're the first person in front of them. You're the one who's supposed to be helping them, guiding them, educating them on all of that.
I tell them like whenever I set up the email search, like I tell them that that is my way of sending them houses is I do the auto email search. And the reason is because like in the off chance that I do get time to check the MLS and send my buyers listings, great. I'll look even better. In the event that I do not, I don't want to look like I haven't done anything for them. So I tell them up front, like, hey, I'm going to set you up on this auto email. That is going to be your way to receive listings. Okay. Those are going to be all listings that meet your criteria. We're going to put that in MLS. So check your email. That way, they don't think that I'm supposed to be texting them links all the time, because you shouldn't be working with just like one or two buyers. Like, you should be working with like multiple customers. But when you have 30 customers you're working with, because you've got 5 active listings, you've got 5 pending, you've got 5 sellers, you've got 5 buyers, right there, that's at least 20 that I think I just named off. And then also think about all of the leads that you're working with that are not pre approved, like your warm to cold leads.
Mhm.
And life starts getting a little busy, especially if you don't have an assistant or a team. When life starts getting a little busy, like, are they mad at you? Do you lose money? Do you get fired? Because then that really sucks, because it's not like you're working with a lot of people, but you're working with just enough people that you don't have time to check the MLS every single day.
Well, that goes back to what you said about systems and models. Like your business having those systems, that's one of those systems. It's a auto email. It takes you 5 minutes to set up, and it's automatic. And you can kind of check that off the list. And so having those things implemented is really important from start to finish, I think.
You want to be able to like set and forget. So you want to automate as much as you can in this business, because
Mhm.
there's so much that people need from you all the time, and you're always on, and it can be overwhelming. So if there's an opportunity to automate something, you should take full advantage of it. So that way you can also serve more people.
Mhm. And serve them in a way that is serving them well and not just collecting a paycheck and leaving your people hanging. So the key discussion points, and we've talked about this, it's going to be a little bit redundant, but that's the buyer needs and wants. Kind of once you go through what the buying process will look like for them and what they can expect, then you can get to the fun stuff if you have time. The wants and needs, the must-haves and the nice-to-haves. Especially if the price point isn't reflecting what they're really wanting, then that's where you can start to narrow down, like, okay, what must you have? You must have a fenced in backyard because of your dog or your child, but it would be nice to have a walk-in closet, stuff like that. And then future plans, are they buying it short-term, long-term, rental property, investment, anything like that. Financing and pre-approval, we've touched on before, but explain to them why pre-approval is so crucial. We always recommend that they're pre-approved before you show a house. It's a waste of their time and your time if you're showing them houses that they can't afford. Um, and then connecting them with a lender if they don't have one. Like we've said in the past, have a list of people that you trust, 2 to 3 people, connect them with. Of course, they're welcome to shop around if they have people that they know, but always have people on hand that you know and trust for that. And then the home search, you can look at listings, you can send them listings, have them set up on an auto email, like Em said. Trying to send them new listings every single day is just not realistic if you're working with multiple buyers, multiple sellers, you're managing these transactions. Have an auto email. If you don't know how to do that, ask people in your brokerage, look up tutorials on whatever CRM or whatever system you're using for that. And then I do have common buyer mistakes, overanalyzing, not acting quickly enough. That's something you can kind of counsel them in during the process if you need to, but you can just quickly say, depending on what market you're in, if you wait too long, typically say homes are going faster, say their average days on market is 7 days, and let them know that for this price range, this is what we're seeing right now. So if you see something that you love and you'd be sick if you didn't put in an offer and try to negotiate it, then I recommend you do that. That's just one example. That can kind of look differently depending on the situation and the person. And then over analyzing. And we just talked about this 2M, limiting how many houses you see per day
Oof.
is so important because when you first
Yes.
start out, you're going to get really eager people who want to see 12 houses in a day. And we
Hmm.
just talked about this. You said around 5 is kind of your max. I say 5 to 8, depending on the area. If the drive time is quicker, again, I live in a small area, so if I'm over here, we can see a lot more in a short amount of time. But the biggest reason for that is having them being overwhelmed and overanalyzing every little thing. They have too many options. They start to shut down. Just from what I've seen in my experience, or it's just a waste of
Yeah.
time because they don't remember. How are you supposed to remember 12 houses and all of the different things you liked and didn't like about them?
They'll start running together.
Yeah.
They always do.
Yeah. Keep that in mind. Help manage those expectations up front. Just say, hey, when we're looking at houses, I recommend this many because I don't want you to get overwhelmed and start to feel discouraged or start to overanalyze X, Y, and Z. You can talk about the offer process. I won't go too much into that. I think we can have a whole episode on offers. We did talk about negotiations a little bit, but just let them know what that process looks like briefly, how homes are priced, what makes a strong offer, and what contingencies are. A lot of people don't know what contingencies are.
Oh
And
gosh,
then
yes.
I do touch on potential negotiation strategies briefly with people if they're interested. A lot of people don't care. Like, they just want to say, get me the house, tell me what to do, and I'll do it. But some people want to know, like, well, what if this happens? What if, someone comes in with a higher offer? Then what do we do? We can talk about escalation clauses or talk about earnest money deposits and all of these different things that can help. Something that I do want to talk about is just addressing common fears or common misconceptions with real estate agents. If they have fears about interest rates, fears about refinancing, fears about the economy and where things are going, it's your job. You're not an economist, you're not a professional beyond what you do, but you can kind of help alleviate some of that if you know where interest rates are and where they're anticipating for them to go, or what you're seeing happening in your market and what you've seen your past clients. Do they have equity from buying 2 years ago? And what is that looking like? And what can we expect?
Yeah, so right now, which I think we did a podcast already on why right now is the perfect time to buy. If you have that objection of, well, I don't know I'm just worried about interest rates. Okay, well, then that's a perfect opportunity for you to explain why right now's the time to buy a house, because the time you want to buy a house is when prices are low and then you can refinance. Okay. The time to buy a house is whenever inventory is up or days on market are higher. Even if your inventory is a little low, that just probably means that the hot houses are selling quickly. And the older, outdated homes are just taking a lot longer to sell. Okay.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
you can still have high days on market. Well, let's negotiate a price down. We can also negotiate the seller to pay discount points, which buys down your rate. And whenever rates do go down, you can refinance, because when rates go down, everyone's going to start coming out and they're going to be in multiple offers again, because they're like, the rates are so great, I got to buy right now. Multiple offers, they're going to drive up the price, and you bought low and you get a refinance
Mm-hmm.
at the same rate that they have. This is now, like, that time is
Mm-hmm.
now to give your buyers everything that they want and need if we think rates are going to go down. And if we don't think that they're going to go down ever, and that's great too, because people still have to buy a home. This is their shelter. And if you have the perspective of the sky is falling and I don't know what to do, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. So whatever you believe to be true, you're right. So why not go ahead and say there's just opportunity out there, because there
Mm-hmm.
is.
Yeah, and I think you can like address their fears and their concerns and validate them in that and just say that's completely normal. I have a lot of people who get overwhelmed. Like, I just don't know. Like, I'm so nervous about buying a house. I'm the first person in my family to ever buy a house. I don't know how this works. I just don't know. Maybe I'm not ready. I recently had someone like this a few months ago, and she was the first person in her family, first generation immigrants, to come into this country and to buy a home. And she, the whole time, even after she got the keys, she was like, "Are you sure? Like, are you sure that this is actually real? Because I just don't want to believe it. I feel like something bad's going to happen." And you can
Aw,
validate them and say, like, that is so normal, but rest assured, like, I got you. And if this is something that you really want and home ownership is a goal of yours, then let me help you get there, because I've done this before. I know what I'm doing, and I will hold your hand. I will talk you through every step of the way if that's what you want. And from what I'm hearing, it sounds like it is. So I don't want you to talk yourself out of it. Stuff like that.
yeah.
And just help reassure people. And you'll figure that out as you get more comfortable and, gauge people and where they're at. Okay. I think that's really everything I have. I know that was a really long episode, probably one of our longest. And we could go off any of those topics that we talked about and do a deep dive, and eventually we will. But that's just a very brief overview of what buyer consultations look like, how to prep yourself and how to prep your clients for entering into the process of buying a home. It can be really scary for a lot of people. It can be overwhelming, especially if they're first time home buyers. Making sure you're confident in the process so that you can teach others about the process and guide them through it. Practice with yourself, practice with family members, practice with agents. We will see you next week. Until then, you can find us on Instagram at the Agent Advantage Podcast. If you have any questions about today's episode, you can email us at theagentadvantagepodcast@gmail.com, and we will see you next week. Thanks so
Bye,
much.
guys.